Please welcome Arkadiy Osovtsov.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arkadiy Osovtsov. I'm from BISB Bratislava, and today I'll be talking to you about perspectives, as you probably all know. Well, what I'll begin with is a subject which is slightly off, but it is nonetheless something which relates to it, and a concept which has been significant to humanity throughout time and will be just as vital as its future as it has been in the past. That concept, ladies and gentlemen, is truth. So what is truth? Well, back in the days of ancient Greece, the days of Plato, it was believed to be something universal, created by the cosmic order itself. As time has passed, this concept has been looked at and constantly re-examined by the greatest minds of humanity. And while I can by no means claim this to be the product of my own thought, I would like to tell you all the truth does not exist. You see, truth, and this is where it begins to link with my topic, always depends on the person's perspective. For instance, if you're all to look at the fantastic illustration in this display, which I also can't take credit for, you will notice a group of people with their individual perspectives on this Loxodonta africana, which I use because I've been told using Latin makes speeches sound more intelligent. Kidding aside, however, this illustrates, in a simplified way, the ideas of the man on whose work I'm basing my speech today, the brilliant German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. You see, Nietzsche, rather like myself, was critical of just about everything around him. In fact, living in a country with the motto, God is with us, he wrote and became famous for a book titled God is Dead. But perhaps one of his most influential philosophies was Perspectivism, and this is what I will focus on here today. What he said was, whatever knowledge we may gain through experience is biased by our very own perspective and interpretation. And I think this is very important to think about, especially in the modern world where we're surrounded by anti-discrimination and anti-bias campaigns, which I do not discredit, but we will come back to that. It is important to remember that in reality, we are all always biased. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. We all have a different background, and because of the individual perspectives we have on things, no universal truth could ever exist. And in fact, it doesn't. Nothing exists perspective-free, and there is no reality which exists independently of our own view of it, at least none that we could ever hope to comprehend. Because contrary to what people believe, anything we see, think, or feel is not merely influenced by our perspective or bias, it is the result of it and cannot exist without it. While this may sound shocking or even wrong to some of you, it is actually widely accepted in our society. I would imagine you have all heard of Einstein, and probably all of you have heard or at some point perhaps even used the phrase, everything is relative, which also translates to nothing is absolute. With this, we arrive at the conclusion that all of our truths and views are all equal and are all equally wrong. A simple and generic example of this would be to say that 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Well, that is true from some perspectives. However, from the perspective of anyone using base 3, this would be utterly false and would in fact be equal to 11. Well, this is depressing, isn't it? Well, luckily, ladies and gentlemen, there is a solution to this. While we may live in a horrifying world with no absolutes to cling to, there is indeed a way to go on. And that is by pretending that absolutes do exist. With a great example of this being scientific theories. They're not meant to be an exact representation of reality. They are in fact only there to allow us to achieve our aims. After all, at one point in history, we believed that heat was a substance made of molecules, a weightless substance which diffused between things. And this was by no means accurate. And yet, from this completely false point of view, as we would accept, it have been derived the great laws of thermodynamics which we still use today and which we're able to employ for our benefit, whether they are in fact absolute truths or not. In fact, if we look at our science, it has all been developed from a specific perspective. All of our science, in terms of the laws of nature, and as an interpretation of nature, was developed with the ideas of democracy and, I would even say, atheism and their respective biases. A scientific law is to us an expression of the value of absolute equality. Just like the values of democracy, everything is equal before those laws. The same way that people are equal in their rights before the law. We can all understand, or at least accept these laws of nature, or scientific laws, as all of us have studied them in school. However, if we analyze it, all of it has been from a purely democratic standpoint and largely from atheist bias. And it is in many ways, and especially according to Nietzsche it is so, similar to religion, which also exists from one perspective and has in turn its own bias, and yet this perspective is of great pragmatic importance to us, as it has resulted in all the technological developments in our modern world which we can see around us today. In fact, it was not just in spite of that bias, but rather due to it that we can see all of that. So how does any of this make any sense exactly? Well, we simply need to assume things as correct under our circumstances and context, regardless of how true they ultimately are, as long as they give us useful results. Or, as Nietzsche put it, the falseness of a judgment is not necessarily an objection to it. The question is to what extent is it life-advancing, life-preserving, species-preserving, and possibly even species-breeding. With this in mind, we come to the final point. All perspectives and their respectful truths may all be equal in how wrong they are, but based on their results, perspectives and truths can be compared with each other, and there may be some perspectives which are more useful than others. But this is, of course, just my perspective on it. Thank you.